is Nancy Auer. Nancy is going to talk about Lake Sturgeon conservation and restoration. She is from the Michigan Technological University. Nancy is on the governing board of the North American Sturgeon and Paddlefish Society. She's also an author. We have a copy of both authors' books out there. And if Ron is the godfather of sturgeon, Nancy must certainly be the godmother of sturgeon. So welcome, Nancy.
Well, thank you. And being a university professor, I know that sitting down for an hour and 40 minutes is going to not be good for your biological being. So please stand up for 2 seconds here and get that blood flowing back in your knees. In 1926, New York State developed the Conservation Department. And on Earth Day, 1970, New York State changed the name to the Department of Environmental Conservation. That was Earth Day, 1970. So what is this word, conservation? If you look in a few sources, it reads preservation, protection, or restoration of natural environment and wildlife. Or act of conserving, preventing injury, decay, waste, or loss. Or maintaining the natural world in order to protect the source of resources. Make sure you get the right button.
There's one on the side.
This one. Short-term memory here. In North America, obviously, we have, depending on who's defining species, 9 sturgeon species in North America and 1 paddlefish, one of only 2 paddlefish in the world. And as a member, as Thomas said, of the North American Sturgeon and Paddlefish Society, and sitting on the board for the last 3 years, we have defined this position or mission of the Conservation Society as being that dedicated to promoting the conservation and restoration of sturgeon species in North America by developing and advancing research pertaining to their biology, management, and utilization. So conservation keeps popping up time and time again. So I wanted to look at our efforts at conservation over the last 15 or so years. In the early 2000s, I was asked to write a chapter on conservation for a book published in 2004. And in that, we learned that threats to recovery at that time for sturgeon species in North America, will get eventually parsed down to lake sturgeon, were the commercial harvest and bycatch problems that we had at that time. A lot of commercial harvest has been reduced now. Barriers to migration and water level fluctuations. Habitat loss in all forms for all stages. Contaminants, still kind of an open question in a lot of places. Illegal harvest and other human impacts, and we'll take a look at a few of those. And then at that time was pretty much the lack of public appreciation or public interest or simple public education. So, how are we doing almost 15 years later? What have we been focusing on? I looked through the early abstracts for this meeting and at some of the other materials and meetings we've been to. And obviously fish passage is still a very big one, or dam removal. Early life history. We still struggle with a lot of early life history issues for sturgeon species. Restoration has been a big focus in a lot of places, especially with enhancing habitat. Status of populations and assessment varies between which agency is working and what kind of funding is available. And obviously a lot of genetic work, DNA barcoding, so that we can determine improper use or take of a lot of sturgeon species. And finally, public education, which I think there have been some groups that have done just a tremendous job on education. Let's take a look at a few of these. Over in Wisconsin, Michigan border, we have the Menominee River, which now has fish passage being put in place for the lower two dams on the Menominee River, and they're looking eventually at perhaps getting passage for the other three higher up in the system. And these dam structures have been blocking this population for a very long time. There's a lot of fish built up at the river mouth, and it's really great to see that these things are actually taking place. It's one of the places, as Ron mentioned, where the lift idea is now being implemented at the lower two Scott Dam locations. And so for what was dreams 50, 60 years ago are now things that are actually being implemented. Larval drift work. I probably was one of you that started this years and years ago, and everybody I talked to just hated it. You hate it because it's at night, you hate it because it's just bugs, 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 and you hate it because there's pans and pans of things to look through, and you can't find the larvae, and it just gets to be a real chore. And you have to do it night after night to get some good data. We've been working on this through a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Coastal Grant, where we have money to look. I'm working with Ed Baker and Kim Scribner, who are working on the Black River. We're using the Sturgeon River as sort of a pristine source to see if we can see and actually find where these darn little larvae are going. And in the last few years, we've used remotely operated vehicles in the river to actually put the thing in the bottom and see if we can watch larvae drift by. We've tried all kinds of vacuum cleaning the sediment to see if we can suck them out of the sediment, and we just keep sampling and sampling and pick netting, and someday we will get a good answer. I'm sorry I don't have a good one for you today. But it is one of those projects that a lot of people just steer away from. The other place where we're seeing some real improvements, not so much in the Great Lakes, because if we remove dams, or especially low head dams in the Great Lakes, we have to address the questions of lamprey movements. And so it's fun and interesting to see some of the work in Minnesota and other areas on low head dams where they don't have these problems, and they can now take the low heads out and allow fish passage more easily. But probably for me, that intrigues me the most. I do a lot of GK-12 work up in our area of Lake Superior, but it's just the impact that grade school and public education does to enhance the protection of these fish. This is a picture. I was honored this year to be invited down to the Blue Water Bridge and the Blue Water Sturgeon Festival by Jim Bowes and Justin Chayat, who did just a marvelous job. If you want to see a template to use for public education, this one was it, at least for me. The group honored the sturgeon, had them in tanks that people could touch but didn't hold them very long, had amazing ability to be in that fast blue water, which I just think was a marvelous opportunity for everyone. And a big tour boat would come up next to the boat the fellows were in working, and they'd have an exchange of questions and other things, and it was just a marvelous, marvelous opportunity to get the general public really hooked on helping us sturgeon. So there still is some progress, I think, to be made. However, it's been a while. As Ron said, he had the 150-year dream, the 100-year dream. When I started working with sturgeon in 1987, I thought, oh, I wonder if I'll live to see this change in power plant operation really reach some significant finding. And that was almost 60 years into the future. And now that I'm 60, it's like, yeah, it worked. Because it doesn't, 60 to 100 years, you can see a change. It's not going to happen overnight, but it does work. Some areas that we still need work, however, are on some stranding issues that still occur. This was the Kaministiquia in Ontario where Mike Friday worked, and he had trouble with operations of the hydropower facility there. That's the big fish on the right. And then we often had a lot of stranding issues with sturgeon on the Sturgeon River in Upper Michigan before we got the power plant relicensed into a near run-of-the-river opportunity. So we have that problem, but on work even this year, a consulting project at Harpen Dam in Wisconsin, we still have fish being stranded. They're usually occurring in operations where there's more than one dam on a river, and so one dam releases, the other one doesn't. Fish get stranded or vice versa. So there's still a lot of coordination of water manipulations that we need to work on. And for us up in Upper Michigan on Portage Lake, we often get fish washing up that have been hit by large vessels. We do have our fish coming down out of the river into a, what did you call that for the place where they eat, the young ones come? Fattening up place. Well, our fish go down to a fattening up place, and unhappily are also within the channel where the large vessels can pass if it's terrible weather or if a ship is bringing in salt. And so a lot of our fish, especially unfortunately the big females, get hit by boat strikes. And I'm going back here to the larvae more for the habitat manipulations and what we can do to bring back larvae. Is it the gravel? Is it something in the substrate that's missing that's we can't quite understand where some of these young larvae are? Or, and it's beginning to look more and more like this in some systems, is it the predators? We have, this is a picture of a rusty crayfish, but for us in the Cedar River up in Upper Michigan, the rusty crayfish are so thick that I can't believe anything gets by them with how much crayfish is available in that system to just keep chewing down the larvae as they drift by. So as Ron mentioned, harvest and managed populations, that's really great because that's where the money is. You can charge and have a program where you get some income, but there's still information needs on history, growth rates, population statistics of sort of a near natural population or one that hasn't been impacted by invasive species, unrestricted movements, or harvest, because we don't know the potential of a lot of these fish. We don't know, as Ron said, what size they can attain. There were 2 early records of 310-pound sturgeon, one from Lake Superior and one from Lake Michigan. And so we don't know what the potential for our stocks of fish could be. One of the biggest disappointments, I think, for me, and I know why, because it takes a lot of effort, is assessment. I've been disappointed because we've been working on the Sturgeon River, like I said, since 1987. We've had a few assessments. Probably the best was the year we did it with side scan sonar, and yet I haven't seen a lot of others pick up the usefulness of side scan sonar for assessing populations. It's probably one of the coolest computery things you can do, and in this age of people with computer skills, it's really a lot of fun to track that orange is sturgeon going through if you're looking at it from a bird's eye view, and the little green blips are suckers. And you can run that machine and it'll take these sonar readings, and you can count the number of sturgeon going up or down the river system. I wish we could get more of this because we have not had an assessment of the population in the Sturgeon River since about 2003, since we ran that experiment. And a lot has happened in the time that from 2003 till now, because we've had some unexpected poaching and perhaps sales of our sturgeon, and so we don't know what that has done to our population. So I want to take a moment to switch gears just a little bit here. Hopefully you'll understand this when we get to the end. But something else that I see a lot of as an educator, I teach a course on science writing practice, and the students drive me nuts because they get a piece of literature with a date that isn't, with a big 2 in front of it, and they come up and they go, "That's really old, is it still useful?" And it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, some of the best stuff is still stuck back there in the old literature. And I get really worried because I think all of us are beginning to be overburdened by everything, and we're kind of letting the old literature slide away, and there's a real value in every once in a while going back and looking at the old literature. One good example, I hope, are these 2 papers, one by Power and McKinley about latitudinal variation, and the other, an old lost thesis on growth and reproduction of lake sturgeon in the Nelson River, Manitoba. And I'm bringing these up because I'm working on a project to reintroduce grayling into the state of Michigan. And we have to know which stock of grayling to try to use. And so it's becoming a little bit more clear that latitudinal birth and population location may have a significant impact on the outcome of that reintroduction effort. But let's go back to sturgeon for a minute. And you can see in the Power and McKinley paper here that, and what you don't know is, all the way over on the right-hand side of the graph, those are Lake Winnebago fish, and all the way on the left side of the graph are Nelson River fish. Now, Nelson River fish are fish which are up almost to Hudson Bay. It's a river that drains into Hudson Bay, pretty far north in the range of sturgeon. And so, kind of looks all right? The fish in Winnebago go bigger than the fish over there in the Nelson River area. Makes sense. But in that paper is this particular graph that shows that the thermal opportunity for growth is probably greater in the Nelson River system than it is in the Winnebago system. And we looked at this because we were, again, looking at grayling and trying to look at similar physiologies and similar outcomes. So why do we see an increased growth rate for the Nelson River? I'm not talking overall growth, it's growth rate. And I believe this was for 25-year-old fish. I'd have to go back and look, and I apologize for that. Why do we see this increase in growth rates? Well, it could be food quality or quantity that is consistent with the summer growing period. Maybe there's a change in the two locations. And I only use these two. There are others, but these are the ones I thought most people could relate to and were at the extremes of the graph. It could be a genetic capacity for growth in the northern fish, that over the years and years of being in the north, only the best and biggest survived overwintering and freezing. Or it could be that in the lower latitudes, that as temperatures get warmer and warmer, you might begin to see that the fish have to leave every once in a while their optimum feeding grounds because of temperature conditions, and so are, again, not feeding optimally in that lower latitude. Or it could be a combination of all. That was what Auer and McKinley developed. So, again, taking a little divergence. Oops, this is the master's thesis. Again, you see fish, and it looks pretty normal. Total length over age, and they're growing. But again, the point here is each population is different. They're not all growing the same. They're not similar. And so maybe we can't just be shifting fish from place to place if little differences in latitude begin to make a big difference. The top two, which one is the point? Big one? Okay. There it is. These two are the warmer latitudes, the more southerly latitudes, and these two are the more northerly latitudes. And so, again, we're seeing differences in specific stream locations, which we have to be careful for. So now I'm going to just give you two quick slides on the grayling, so you can hopefully tie this together. As I said, we're trying to do a project on the reintroduction of Arctic grayling. And this is a map of their locations. And you'll see in the lower area here in Montana and Michigan, there's just the slightest blobs of populations that existed there. They were totally wiped out of Michigan by 1936. But what we see and what we found is in a sensitivity analysis for population extinction probability, we see some different things occurring. In the south, the biggest factor here in these populations is that I gotta read this with the right way. The greatest sensitivity to change is in the fecundity, or the egg survival. That's what is supposed to be the limiting factor for probability of extinction. Whereas in the north, it's adult survival. And in that middle zone, it's both of them together. So, and it makes a whole lot of sense now as we're trying to reintroduce fishing. And Montana has had trouble with grayling, is fecundity is the biggest issue. How many of them are spawned? How many of those youngsters live to survive. And so we have to look for conditions where we can really protect that. So then you go to, well, what about this for lake sturgeon? Could this be applied to lake sturgeon since the southernly populations may not fare as well as we get warmer summer temperatures? And maybe that again sturgeon will be forced to leave those zones where it gets a little bit warmer than normal during the summer, so they're not going to grow quite as well. And will that impact our sturgeon populations? Also, will the fact that a lot of the southern populations are restricted in movement, if you can remember Ron's graph of populations that are barriered by dams and other things, this may influence our populations in the future. So, back to conservation. All of us, no matter who you work for or which group you're attached to, the North American Sturgeon and Paddlefish Society or some other group, all of us are called to conserve and restore sturgeon. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be sitting in this room. But for me, do we see all of these fish as just lost? This is the Chinese paddlefish and the Chinese sturgeon, one of the largest in the world, now thought to be either so demised that may not be recoverable. And then the Amugara shovel-nosed sturgeon, which is believed to simply be a culture organism now and not even alive in the wild. You know, are these just things we write off? Or are these things that break your heart? For me, the fact that two of the largest freshwater fish on earth in China may not be, breaks my heart. So, my point today, I think, is that I'm hoping that we can see a little bit beyond the fishery idea and try to work at seeing this fish as something more, something incredible, something that survives, something some call an ancestor, something that's an ecosystem partner. Obviously, as Ron was mentioning, these fish are helping keep Lake Winnebago clean by eating up all those gizzard shad, which is a pretty tough fish to have accumulating anywhere. It's my feeling, and since I'm older and I was chuckling with James Bowes about, you know, I am older and what the heck, you know, say what you really want to say. You know, as we work with our fish, all of us, we increase the awareness, and we work with increasing that awareness with sturgeon. We increase our responsibility to conserve and restore respectfully and responsibly. And I'm calling you today to think a little more broadly and think beyond just opportunities for maybe increasing finances and find more ways to find that. I would love to see a sturgeon population that gets some windows on a dam where you can actually have the people go and look at the fish as they swim through. Other opportunities such as the Blue Water Bridge education, things that go beyond what our typical thinking is. In NASP, they passed a feature on their website that no pictures of people just holding a trophy fish will be included. Fish in water will be shown, but if you go on NASP's website, the fish are not held up out of water. in the typical position we often see for these fish. Again, this shows respect and regard for our fish. I'd like to see if we couldn't have a little change in a benevolent way, and maybe have management as not a one-size-fits-all, which begins to appear more and more. We bring back these fish, especially like our own on the Sturgeon River, and fish are coming back, the population's growing, and the first thing is, when can we harvest them? And maybe there's a way to have management where we don't harvest every population we bring back. Certainly there's areas and features where this is a great idea, where you have A, the public, and B, people willing to help join you and protect the fish in your Sturgeon for Tomorrow or other groups. But maybe other areas need to just be Sturgeon places. You know, Sturgeon places where we might see a 300-pound sturgeon someday again. So I'd like to suggest that we realize the uniqueness of some of the populations and the parameters of where these populations are, and maybe take a look at a few types of management. When New York State named the Department of Environmental Conservation in 1970, I was standing on a podium in Duluth, Minnesota as the head of the chapter of the Students for Environmental Defense. That was Earth Day 1970, and about a year or so before that day, I had bought this book, and I have lived with this book forever. "In Wildness is the Preservation of the World." And I believe that, but I also believe now that there's some words missing here, some important words. Reverence. We need to reverence. We need to show our regard and respect for this organism. Native tribes knew it long ago when we're doing tribal work and we have sturgeon release. Tribal peoples release each fish individually and say a blessing or a thank you using tobacco as the fish are reintroduced into the water. So I believe this book needs changing, and it's not just for sturgeon, it's for everything. In reverencing the wildness is going to be the preservation of our world. You can see it in our environmental problems today. We need to build a sense of wonder and awe when we work with these fish, because this translates into the wonder and awe and respect for not only the ecosystem, but the environment and our whole earth, everywhere. We urgently need to bring reverence into our conservation efforts, not just with sturgeon and paddlefish, but to our entire natural environment and the wildlife in it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was excellent. Do we have some questions for Nancy Auer? She did such a good job, she doesn't need questions. All right, so we're right on time. Here's one question.
What do you think is the, probably, if you were to pick two things that you want this group to take home, what are the two things that they can use, tangible things moving forward with this group? A lot of young people here.
Jim's question is, if I could name two things I'd like you to take home messages. I think one is, be aware all the time when you're with this fish of what you say and do and how you touch it and handle it, what regard you show for it. And the other is, when you're out in the woods or the water or wherever you are and you see poor behavior by someone or trash or garbage, pick it up and be the example. Because I've been with groups, we've taken some underprivileged children out on research vessels in Lake Superior, and everybody's, oh, Lake Superior's so beautiful, it's so beautiful. And they're all excited, and we pack them back in the truck, and we're taking them back to wherever they have to go, to the dorm or somewhere, and they're eating Twinkies, something, and they open the wrapper and throw the wrappers out the window, and it's like, wait, you just were here, and look at that. You know what? We have to be the examples, and we have to do a better job with this fish because a lot of people don't see it. And so when they see it, it's a moment where you can change how they perceive this fish.
All right, thank you. Another round of applause.